Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for this session. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day. It's a gloomy day in Pittsburgh, but I hope it's nice where you are. Today, we're going to be joined by CEO of Nextlink Labs, Jordan Saunders. He's going to show us how DevOps enhances your security posture. My name is Ian Blythe. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Nextlink. So thanks so much for joining. I could tell that a lot of you have already found the chat window over there. We appreciate you taking advantage of that. I'm going to be handling the quarterbacking in the chat window during this presentation, but please use it to get our attention, ask questions, provide commentary, or just let us know how we're doing over here. We'll try and get your questions answered during the course of the presentation. If we don't, we're going to save them to the end and try and give you guys a chance to ask some questions. Also, I had another poll I wanted to ask that you guys fill out if you wouldn't mind. One moment. So check this out. I'm popping this in the polling window. We've also found that. So just a little bit of housekeeping here. If you can hear me, please let me know in the chat so I know I'm not talking to anybody. Boy, that'd have been embarrassing. But we keep everybody muted and keep the conversation going. At the end, we're going to follow up with a link to the recorded webinar. I appreciate that. Matt, thanks so much. We'll follow up with a link to the recorded webinar. Also, we ask that you follow us on Facebook. Check out our LinkedIn page. Connect with us on Twitter. Let us know how we're doing. And also provide some ideas for the next upcoming webinar. Let us know, the best ideas we get come from the audience, talking to us and telling us what they want to hear. So let us know what you'd like to see on an upcoming webinar. Also look out for other stuff we're going to be doing in the future. We're thinking open office hours. We're thinking podcasts. We got a lot coming down the pike. So pretty excited about all that. But if nothing else, I think I wanted to make sure everybody had a chance to take the poll. Wow. That's a nice spread of information. I hope you could see that, Jordan. But excellent. I really appreciate everybody joining. Looks like a real healthy audience today. This is going to be a good one. So without any more of my chattering on, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and pass it over to Jordan.
All right. Thanks, Ian. Welcome, everybody. I know everybody's busy, so I appreciate people taking their time out of the day to listen and view this webinar. So this webinar is going to be focused on how DevOps is going to enhance your security posture. So my name is Jordan Saunders. I am the CEO and Chief Architect here at Nextlink Labs. We are a boutique digital transformation company focused on cybersecurity, DevOps, and full stack solutions. I was really excited to put on this webinar because being a digital transformation consultancy, we always talk to companies that are at different stages of dealing with their security and DevOps issues. So it's really exciting to me to be able to put this together to help shed some light. We tend to see companies that might be really mature in DevOps and a little less mature in security, or vice versa. And the point of this webinar is really to describe how these things kind of work together. So in the webinar, we're going to go over a little bit at a high level what DevOps is. We're going to go over at a high level security and compliance. We're going to talk a little bit about what a current application looks like, as well as the infrastructure that hosts it. And then we're going to talk about some of the DevOps tools and parts of DevOps that are aligned with security. So without too much further ado, let's talk about DevOps. So DevOps is one of those things that's become a little bit of a buzzword, but what it really is it's a framework for enabling teams and people to be successful. And so there's an interesting word in that definition there, and that's the word framework. So, there's not really one size fits all solution to DevOps. It's really a set of guidelines. It's a framework to work off of to help companies be successful and teams be successful. And so as such, it's not just kind of tools and automation. That's really, when we talk to a lot of our clients, that's kind of the first thing they think of, right? Is they think of, okay, we have this DevOps group and they're working with some tools to automate things. But DevOps is really people, process, and technology. It has to consider all three of those aspects. And why is that? A big part of that is that if you put tools in place but don't consider the people that it impacts or the processes that it impacts, you're only seeing one part of the equation, and it really takes all three to be successful. So being kind of a buzzword like DevOps, I mean, it kind of reminds me sometimes of another word that gets thrown around, and that's Agile. But DevOps is not just another software methodology like Agile or extreme programming. It's a cultural shift, just like those things. So they do kind of lean off of each other a little bit, but they really are separate. So, let's talk a little bit about some of the main aspects of DevOps at a high level. So, a big part of DevOps is this collaborative environment. I mean, look no further than the word DevOps. I mean, it's built off of the words developers and operations. You may have heard another variation of DevOps called DevSecOps. We don't throw that word around a lot because to us, security should be part of the process the whole way. So it's a little redundant to say DevSecOps, but again, it's about putting these groups together. And, why is this so important? So, previously in some companies, you kind of had your developers that would work on putting out features and building software. And then you'd have the operational group that the developers would throw over the fence, their solution, and they would be in charge of getting it deployed and operating it. And then you'd have your security folks that are in charge of making sure things are secure and there's no vulnerabilities. And this sounds great in practice, right? But what happens when there's an issue, right? What happens when there is a vulnerability in production and there's some sort of breach? What happens when the security folks have no idea what any changes to the infrastructure that's been made, any changes developers have worked on? That's really challenging for them to solve. And so, DevOps is about putting all these same people in the room the whole way and having them have a say in how things are done. And part of that is them taking ownership of those things, right? So as a developer group or as a security group, you have your own goals for your team, but as a company and as an organization, your goals are aligned, right? If you have a software product, you want that product to reach its users, you want it to be secure, you want it to be reliable, you want people to love using it. And so, those big picture goals are aligned. And so a big part of DevOps is putting the right tools and process in place that teams are able to work together. So another big aspect of DevOps, and again, these are aspects that they all have impact on security, but one especially is kind of the culture of observability, right? So in 2020, our systems have become very complicated. You deploy software to the cloud, things scale up, things scale down. We have microservice architectures that take a lot of work to maintain. And it's tough to know what's going on in those applications. I'm sure a lot of engineers could tell you when they've gotten feedback from a sales or a client team and say, hey, this application's not working. And if you don't have things in place, it's tough to know where the problem is. So as operational experts, DevOps teams really need the tools in place to be able to see what's going on. And this also translates to security, right? So from a security team, if there is some sort of vulnerability or there's some sort of breach, it's really important that a security team is able to know what changes took place into that system, who accessed that system, how that system changed over time. And that's a really important piece of it. And then another, and probably again, the most commonly thought of piece of DevOps is this concept of automating everything. So both from an operational and a security perspective, automation is fantastic. Humans are really good at doing some things, but in terms of repeating the same tasks over and over, there is a large chance that over time humans will make mistakes. And so the more automation that's in place, the less chance that we're going to make a mistake and it's going to cause an issue with how software is operating. And the same thing on the security side. Humans tend to be a really good place for vulnerabilities to take place. I'm sure you've heard about, phishing scams that happen, people sharing credentials over unsecured networks, things like that. When you start automating things and you can take the human element out of it, you eliminate the chances of these things happen, at least, as much as possible. So let's move on a little bit to security and compliance. So I just want to call out the definition of these two words because I'm going to be using them a little bit throughout the presentation. But, security, this is the set of tools and processes that really protect and defend IT assets and systems, right? And then compliance, on the other hand, this is a snapshot of looking at those tools and systems and seeing how you're doing against a set requirements. And in many people's cases, these are regulatory or contractual requirements. So you have the security aspect, and this is the actual things that protect you. And then you have the compliance aspect that really, you're comparing it against a framework or a set of guidelines or, requirements. So again, I did think about boring you all to death and going through all the items from some compliance frameworks, but I didn't think anyone would ever show up to one of our webinars again. So I decided to just kind of summarize. These are some of the items that are in many compliance frameworks. And specifically, these are things that I think DevOps really helps, enables teams to do well, right? And so one of those big things that's is a big focus in security and compliance is the actual auditability, right? We talked about that culture of observability, but from a security perspective, you want to know what's the current state of your systems are. And not only that, you want to know how they got there. So you want to know who's had access, what changes were made, and how they were made. Along the same lines, you want to make sure there's clear process for everything. So if there is an incident, a security incident, if there is downtime, if there is some sort of disaster, you need process put in place to be able to recover from those things, to know what to do in that situation. And so again, a lot of these compliance controls really have a big focus on what the process is to recover from these things and to deal with these things. And not just that, but it's just in the course of business, to know how changes are made and how things are deployed and things like that. And then another really common item, as you can imagine, in these security frameworks is the concept of access control, right? So we want to have systems that are kind of secure by nature and require the minimum amount of access to them, both from humans and systems, right? So if you're just a regular user, you shouldn't have access to an entire system. So we want these compliance frameworks make sure that only the right users have access to systems, and you're tracking how that access is given. There's a process to give and retract that access. And these are common throughout all the security frameworks. So again, just summing this up one more time, and I'm doing this so when we go through some of the DevOps focuses, you can kind of see how they really relate to this. But basically, you want to secure everything. So secure configurations and thinking about security. You want to limit access as much as possible. You want to limit the human interaction. And you want to be able to see, a snapshot of these systems and understand at any given point in time what the systems look like, what's deployed, and what changes have been made to them. So with that being said, systems look very different in 2020, and they will look different in 2021 than systems looked like in 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And in our opinion, a mature, modern application stack needs to be secure and it needs to be reliable. And so because of that, that's a big part of the wave of DevOps. And because of that, they focus on a lot of these different things, right? So today's applications, they have the infrastructure defined as infrastructure as code. We're going to dive a little bit deeper to that in a couple minutes, but it's just what it sounds like. We have, CI/CD systems. So this is the continuous integration and continuous deployment. Modern applications tend to be container-based. Most people have probably heard of Docker by now, but most applications are built and deployed using Docker as part of that tool set. And that's really made a lot of changes. Modern applications, again, because there's so many moving pieces, need to have robust monitoring, and they need to have systems in place to control and moderate access. So access control systems. And last but not least, with all these moving parts, things need to be auditable. And, as developers and as engineers, we've come up with some interesting solutions to these things. And so as engineers do, the first thing they thought of to do was to codify everything, right? So we're going to talk about infrastructure as code, but it's not just the infrastructure as code. When you deploy software now, most of your software tests are defined as code. The actual deployment scripts are written as code. And last but not least, the packaging software is the package deployment of the software is defined as code. And why is this so important? Both, again, from an operation and security perspective. And that's the one thing code does really well is it lives in source control. So we have these Git systems, and Git as a system is able to really show someone the stage a code is in its lifeline, right? So you're able to get a snapshot of not just what the current code looks like, or in this case, the current infrastructure or deployment scripts, but you're also able to see over a course of time what changes were made, how those changes were made. And you're able to go look at it in the history and see, okay, on July 10th of 2019, when we had a breach that was reported, what did the code look like? And so you're able to take those benefits and you're able to translate that into infrastructure. And that's really important. And especially from a security perspective too, it's good to have that system of record that Git provides. And, one more thing we'll talk about a little bit more in the CI/CD portion, but when things live in code, or when things live in code and they live in Git, you're able to take advantage of some of the features of things like GitHub and GitLab, where you're able to make a pull request or merge request. You're able to put some firm process, again, which is a big part of both security and DevOps. You're able to put some process in place that has to be enforced into the actual system that holds the code. And that's really beneficial to, again, security and operations. So I want to focus on a couple things specifically I called out in that list. And one of those is infrastructure as code. So when I think of DevOps and when we get called into a client to look at a company's DevOps process and see how we can improve it, one of the first things I look at is how they're utilizing infrastructure as code. So let me tell you a story about how things work, 10, 12 years ago, and even maybe a little more recently. But previously, if you wanted to deploy infrastructure, you might log into AWS or log into Azure, click through the GUI, add a database, add a few servers. Over time, you continue to modify that. But that became something that's really, really difficult to manage as your servers grow and your assets grow into the dozens and the hundreds. And so what infrastructure as code is, it's a way to manage the setup and provisioning of those servers through basically configuration files. So this has a lot of benefits, again, both to operations and security. So the first is that it basically makes your infrastructure auditable, right? So if these compliance frameworks want you to know and want you to dictate, hey, you need to have a record of what your systems are and how they changed over time. Well, all of a sudden, when it lives in code, it becomes pretty clear how things have changed over time. Now, sometimes people can actually make manual changes even when you're using infrastructure as code. But that's one of the things we look for and try to sniff out is making sure that they're not able to make manual changes. Also, infrastructure as code has really changed the way we think of infrastructure. So there's this concept of cattle versus pets, right? And the way we used to manage infrastructure was like a pet, right? They were loved by us, used to purchase them and put them in a data center. And then over time, it would continue to change, right? You'd patch things, you'd update things, you'd deploy things, you'd change the configuration. But now with infrastructure as code, we treat things more as cattle, right? We treat them as kind of disposable objects. And what's really nice about that is, and when you need to make an update, you don't actually make an update to the actual server. You update the scripts that create it, the code that creates it. So one, you have a log of it, but then two, you don't have to worry about what's already on the server. This has some added security benefits too, because for an attacker that's trying to penetrate your systems, if that server is not going to be around very long, it gives them a much smaller window to do malicious actions in your network. And that's really important for security. And the last aspect that's really great about infrastructure as code is you're able to be consistent in how you handle things. So if you're a developer and you're writing code and you have the same block of logic, you wouldn't put it in 50 or 60 places within your application. You would create a function or a class and you'd reuse that, right? And so by defining infrastructure as code, you're able to reuse that same definition over and over throughout your infrastructure. And so where this really helps is operationally, but on the security side, that this enables you to be able to spend some extra time hardening the configuration. So making sure the security policies, the ports that are open, making sure all these things are done right once, and then you're able to replicate it throughout your infrastructure, which is really great. So continuous integration and continuous deployment are also a big part of DevOps, and they have a lot of benefits both for operational teams and security teams. So, a typical CI/CD stack for, a very simple application, the developers would write code. At some point they would commit it, and this is where the CI/CD process would take over. So it would automatically run tests against that code, package the code, run vulnerability scanning, and then take care of everything all the way through deployment. So this is really nice for a couple of reasons. So one, there's a clearly traceable build process, which again makes security folks very happy. You don't have to wonder or hunt through emails or Slack messages to wonder, when did we deploy something and what was deployed and how did that deployment go? You have a clear system of record for how that build process went and how that software was built and deployed. Also, another big part is that we talked about how DevOps is not just the technology portion, but it's process. And through CI/CD tooling, we're actually able to make sure process is followed with the tools. So, one of the major CI/CD tools we use is GitLab, and GitHub has very similar things, but basically, when you deploy code, you're able to use those same system of pull requests and merge requests and approvals. And so make it so once you deploy code to a branch, it might need approved by a manager or a QA team or some designated party before it's actually merged and built and deployed. And this is something that's very clearly defined, needs very clearly defined in that process that it is followed in a number of security frameworks. So it's really important that the tooling and CI/CD system is able to help be something that enables and not something that gets in the way. So containers are also, as I mentioned, part of modern infrastructure and applications that have really changed the way we've done things. Previously, things would just be put on hard metal, or they would be put in virtual machines. But containers are much more portable, and they're much more disposable. These are what really enabled you to enforce that your infrastructure is immutable. When you build a container, what happens is you build it off of a definition file, and once it's built, it's deployed and used throughout your maybe Kubernetes cluster or your ECS cluster. But once it's built, it typically doesn't change very much. And so what this is really nice from a security perspective is that typically when you build these containers, you're inheriting from some community projects, maybe a community Ubuntu version, or a certain distro of Linux that has PHP or Python, right? And so when there's a vulnerability, previously you'd have to go in and you'd have to actually patch all those servers. But now with immutable infrastructure and containers, you're actually able to wait. Instead of running the patch, you actually just update to the newer version of that container or that container inheritance that basically it pulls from the community and will rebuild that container, and then you can redeploy it. So you don't need to go through that long patching process. And you don't need to wonder if you have 100 servers, where those 100 servers are in their life cycle, how many have been patched, right? You can get them all to the same version. Which makes things, very easy to update and makes it very easy for you to keep your environments in parity. So just circling around, DevOps tooling in general, some of these things don't fit into one category, but it really can't be understated, like all the benefits DevOps has for security. The biggest benefit is that everything is automated. You get real-time answers to your problems, and you're removing a big part of security vulnerabilities, which is the human, right? It's very easy to be flexible when you have a strong DevOps practice. Things need changes quickly sometimes. And if you have, a very legacy system, it can be really difficult to bring in changes. We get called into projects sometimes where they are trying to meet some contractual obligations and their systems are holding them back. And it's not a good feeling when they have a great product, they have a great design team, they have a great marketing team, and they have people that love their product, but they're not able to actually sign on with a new client or sign on with a partner because their systems are so old, or their systems aren't easy to operate, and it's not easy to actually meet security and compliance requirements. Another big benefit of modern DevOps tooling is that they kind of consider zero trust networking as a first-class citizen. So this is a methodology that modern DevOps teams have adopted, and in my opinion, with things crossing multiple clouds, now people have part of their work in Azure, part of it in Google Cloud, part of it on-prem, part of it in AWS. It's more and more important that we don't trust the networks that our applications are hosted on. Again, it provides consistency and hardening, and this allows you to set things up once the way you want it and replicate it, so you're able to spend that extra time making sure it's extra secure. And last but not least, the reduced need for privileged accounts. We talked about some of this tooling and how it can automate things. This means less people need access, and it actually means that the privileged accounts that are set up for your systems can have as minimal access as necessary. So, I started this presentation talking heavily about how DevOps is not just a technology solution. It impacts people and culture. And so then I went and talked about a bunch of the technical solutions, but there are some real benefits to the culture changes that DevOps subscribes to. And the biggest thing, again, to me, is that everyone has a place at the table. It's getting your development teams, your security teams, your operations teams working in lockstep. Everyone should be on the same page. Everyone should understand what the common goals are, and they should understand the changes that are being made. So they're able to react to them and take ownership. That shared ownership and responsibility leads to knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing within teams, which is something that every leader strives to do. And another important part is just the emphasis that DevOps puts on process, right? So if you look through any compliance framework, there's going to be a lot of items that say you need to have a process for all these different things. When someone joins the organization, when someone leaves the organization, when software is deployed, when backups are made, all of these super fun things. And it's tough if you don't have a great DevOps process, because it's one thing to write things in a Word document and distribute it to your team, and it's a whole other thing to have tools put in place that enforce that this process is happening. And it's also good to know that your developers and your operational teams care about process, and it's part of their culture. And I think that's a big benefit that DevOps gives, and that security really benefits from. So, just kind of summarizing, I know I threw a bunch of information at you very quickly, but there's some major items that are aligned between DevOps and security. So on the people side, the culture of accountability can't be understated. Developers, security teams, and operations teams working together, and the investment in process. And on the technology side, I think that infrastructure as code, CI/CD, containers, and the culture of observability really lend itself to making both operational teams as well as security teams' lives much easier. So these are a few of the tools we use here at Nextlink. I'm sure now that we've gone through some of the highlights, you're probably wondering kind of what's next. And from a tool perspective, which is kind of always what excites everyone, what can we get into? These are some of the tools we use. GitLab, GitHub, and Circle CI are three either Git providers or CI/CD providers. We use them all the time. HashiCorp products, we use them a lot too, either for infrastructure as code, secret management, or access control, which are the three products you see up top here. And then the three at the bottom, Ansible, this is a Python configuration management tool, and Helm and Kubernetes are two container orchestration tools that we use all the time. So if you're wondering kind of what's next, these tools can definitely probably help you in what you're doing. And if you're looking for some more help in using these tools, or maybe wondering what your current DevOps process looks like, and if it's all right, if it's up to speed, and if you can meet security compliance frameworks, we'd be happy to help. So, feel free to reach out on the web or email. I'm not sure if we got any questions during this presentation, but I will kick it back to Ian and let him deal with that.
It was a fantastic presentation. Thanks so much, Jordan. I appreciate it. We just had a couple, but I just wanted to come back on real quick and say thanks for the presentation. It was awesome. We appreciate everybody joining us today for this presentation. If you have anything you wanted to ask in addition, go ahead and check out the chat window and type in your question. One of the things that came up, Jordan, is you said in the beginning, people, process, and technology. It takes all three for this to happen. Mm-hmm. But for some companies, that can be a mountain to climb, because we're talking about resources that are expensive. We're talking about processes that are unknown, and technology is expensive by nature. If you're a medium-sized company that's looking to navigate these roads, which one of those do you think you could hone in on first to make a cost-effective decision here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's one that you can just focus on. I really do think it takes a collective effort. We've seen a lot of war stories and horror stories of companies that pull in the latest, greatest technologies without really considering what their current workforce looks like, what their goals are, and what their current process is. And that's when you have two things butting heads and working against each other, and it can be really challenging. So, it really takes all three. We love to start with a culture and just educating, our clients and our partners to know that it is this holistic view of things, and you can't just throw some tools at a problem, or you can't just, dictate some process without the right tools. These things will be fighting against each other if you don't do all of them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, we talk about this too. You can learn a lot of things. You can, DIY a lot of things. You can learn code and you can get through a project. But sometimes, this is really, really a gamble to, try and DIY this stuff. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think it's definitely really challenging. Like I said, we've learned a lot through our travels, and, we continue to learn every day. That's the kind of organization we are. And so it's really tough to start at square one. There's some good resources out there. We're always putting resources out on our website. But, that's one of the reasons we exist is, to help with these things however needed. So
that's right. Well, that's all the time we have. I really appreciate everybody joining us for this. Like I said, look forward to an email from us. We'll be reaching out with a recording of the webinar so you could share it with your friends and family. But aside from that, Jordan, thanks so much for the great presentation, and I look forward to talking to you all again sometime.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ian, and have a great day.